Hi, Justin Jolene here with another issue of the Running Specialist Report. And today we're going to be going over some of the hot topics in running research. First, be prepared for questions on carbon-plated shoes. Then, help prevent running injuries with evidence-based exercises. And lastly, consider plantaris for runners with Achilles tendinopathy. So let's talk about some of these important topics. So first, let's talk about how to be prepared for questions on carbon-plated shoes. So runners certainly have had a lot of buzz about carbon-plated shoes, and they'll get you questions over and over again about whether it's appropriate for them to run in carbon-plated shoes. Now, clinicians should advise runners that carbon-plated shoes do improve running economy and performance for recreational runners. However, not all carbon-plated shoes are the same. And so emerging research has found that the carbon stiffness is going to be a big factor, and the curvature is a big factor as well. We need to tailor that for individual runners. So what are our clinical pearls? Well, carbon shoes do improve running economy and performance. However, carbon shoes also increase longitudinal bending stiffness, and that's going to limit MTP extension and optimize plantar flexors during push-off. Also, we do see evidence supporting the use of curved carbon-plated shoes over flat ones. And then lastly, we need to really think about the stiffness of that carbon plate. We should be considering different stiffnesses for different runners to make sure we're not giving someone a shoe that is one size fits all. So, since the emergence of the Nike Vaporflies back in 2017, carbon-plated shoes have gained immense popularity, and this is one of the reasons your runners will ask you these questions. Now, a lot of this popularity came because records were broken in these shoes. Eliud Kipchoge had his first sub 2-hour marathon, and there's been a lot of nice popularity and PR about carbon-plated shoes. However, what's really the mechanics? What is underneath carbon-plated shoes? Well, let me tell you. So carbon-plated shoes are going to be affecting longitudinal bending stiffness. It's basically going to be the amount of resistance that the shoe has to bending the toe of the shoe backwards towards the heel. And here's a nice picture of how we'd gauge that. Now, adding a carbon plate to the shoe's midsole is going to increase longitudinal bending stiffness, so it's going to make it a stiffer shoe. However, a lot of these shoes will still have EVA or PIBA foams that can still give a lot of responsiveness and a lot of cushion. So it's a nice happy medium adding a midsole that has carbon to it. However, we want to think about the biomechanics of what's going on here. Now, research has found that carbon-plated shoes with a moderate amount of longitudinal bending stiffness does decrease energy costs while running. Now, what they found in the research was that this is running at 13 kilometers per hour or 8 miles per hour. And this is going to limit MTP extension and optimize plantar flexors during push-off. As you can see here, let's talk about the biomechanics of really what's going on. And I'm going to highlight it here for you. So this is a nice picture of a foot with a carbon plate in blue here and also explained, and then no carbon plate on the left. So as you can see, with the carbon plate, we actually keep a pretty straight foot. We don't see MTP extension. Now, what is that going to do? And I'm going to take you back to your kinesiology and movement class from the first day or first week of PT school. We're talking about force levers here and moment arms. And while I don't want to get into those details, all I really want to point out here is that instead on the left where you're pushing off from the MTPs, you're actually pushing off from the toes or distal toes on the right-hand side with that carbon plate. So essentially what that carbon plate is going to do is it's going to make it so you have a longer lever arm. It's going to make it so that you essentially have better leverage. It's going to make it so that the plantar flexors don't overly shorten too quick during push-off. That's going to make them more efficient. It's going to get more power out of them. And additionally, you're keeping the MTPs in a neutral place. You're not extending them. Again, that's going to make it so that you're using that longer lever arm. So to capitalize on this and to recap, it's really just making it so that you're pushing off from the end of the toes rather than the MTPs. That's going to make it so that the plantar flexors don't overshorten. It's going to make it so you have a more efficient push-off and you're going to have more power propulsion during running. Now, it's also important to be aware that there are two types of carbon plates, and I want to show you that right now too. There's flat carbon plates and curved carbon plates. Now, the flat carbon plates are good, and they certainly are providing some stability, some stiffness to shoes. However, the curved carbon plates are really important. And this is because basically that curvature is going to be under the MTPs in the forefoot, and that curve to the carbon plate is also going to mirror the shape of the foot. And as it mirrors the shape of the foot, it's going to then disperse the impact forces. So you're going to have less impact to the MTPs. You're also going to limit the MTP extension because it's essentially like it's a mold of the foot. It's going to help to keep nice flat contact and broad contact with the ground. So curved carbon plates are the way to go. Now, I also want to talk about the fact that there are varying levels of longitudinal bending stiffness or stiffnesses among shoes. And while most clinicians don't use a digital force gauge to test longitudinal stiffness, practicing clinicians can use something called a break test. Now, I have a nice video about this, but I'll also go ahead and share this with you. A break test is going to basically be you put one hand on the back of the shoe, one hand on the front of the shoe. You're going to then take those palms and compress them together. You're going to basically fold the shoe, try to kind of fold it in half. You're looking for how much force does it take to break. This is going to give you an idea of how stiff a shoe is. Now, clinicians should be aware that longitudinal bending stiffness should be adjusted based on the runner. Both runner speed and weight influence the amount of longitudinal bending stiffness that we would want to prescribe. So, faster or heavier runners are going to need a stiffer shoe, while lighter, slower runners are going to benefit from a less stiff shoe. Now, clinicians should keep an eye out for new research with specific numbers here, and I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty here just for a second. What we measure this is with basically how much force we're putting through the shoe, how much it takes to bend that shoe. So what are we seeing are typical values here? Well, longitudinal bending stiffness would be 6 newtons in a Nike Free, for example, and it would be all the way up to 86 in a Saucony Endorphin Pro Plus. That's on the higher side. So what we're seeing is that research is showing 35 is going to be a good number to be able to be used for 65 kilogram individual or 143 pounds. And that would be a runner that's running at 13 kilometers per hour or 8 miles per hour. That is roughly an 8-minute mile. Now, that gives you a reference point to work from. And carbon-plated shoes providing increased longitudinal bending stiffness are going to be helpful for some runners, but also let's point out here that some runners may not need that longitudinal bending stiffness that a carbon shoe provides. So for these runners, a non-carbon shoe would be completely fine. It's going to also provide good running economy and performance as well. And if you do want to see the whole list of carbon shoes and non-carbon shoes ranked by longitudinal bending stiffness, check out Runner Resources. You can log in and take a look at the whole complete list so you have a reference of what to prescribe for runners that come in.